For 3 years, the carnage continued. But in the spring of 1864, few were aware that the death toll was only a prelude to the carnage that was yet to come. Too many times in this war, raw troops, barely trained, found themselves being led into the crucible of war under the command of officers who were officers in name only. Many were politicians, lawyers, clerks, or cadets just weeks before leading men into battle. For 3 bloody years, the battles of the Civil War were fought much the same as battles have been fought on the fields of Europe for centuries. Troops lined up in neat rows with flags flying and pounded each other into bloody submission. What many thought in 1861 would be a short conflict was now, sadly, a protracted war. A war that has introduced horrible new weapons. A war that is about to be fought by seasoned troops. A war that will bring together the largest military formations ever seen on any battlefield anywhere in the world. Shiloh, Antietam, Fredericksburg, Gettysburg. Added to the death toll, yet changed nothing. In the spring of 1864, change was about to come at last. The inept commanders, for the most part, had been sacked or simply went home after having spilled their share of blood. Now, a new breed of commanders was about to take the field. They were professional soldiers, with a professional way of fighting this war. They were soldiers whose names to this day are still uttered with reverence. These new commanders were about to step forward and change how wars would be fought forever. Those changes, those lessons, those heroes were forged in fire and blood on the fields of Virginia and Georgia in the spring of 1864. In 1864, there was great dissatisfaction in the North with the conduct of the war. Despite heavy losses and great sacrifices, the Union had not been able to defeat the Confederate armies in the field. The government of the United States faced 2 challenges never before thrust upon any government before or since. 1, the national election of a head of state while the fate of the government was in jeopardy. And 2, the enlistments of many of the soldiers fighting the war were about to end.
Time is running out for the Union as we enter 1864. First is, in the time of the Civil War, you were not in for the convenience of the government. You were in for a fixed enlistment. If you were in a 2-year enlistment, you were out the day your enlistment was up, even if you were in the sound of the gun. So a number of enlistments of the 2- and 3-year regiments will run out. More important, Mr. Lincoln is going to have to submit his policies to the approval of all the people. If the war is not going well on election day in November, Mr. Lincoln can be thrown out of office and a new president, who undoubtedly will win on a platform of lack of confidence in the ability of the administration to win the war, and will look toward a division of the nation permanently.
Opposition to Lincoln's policies had grown in his own party to such an extent that in the spring of 1864, his close advisors doubted they could hold a majority in Congress. While Lincoln fights his political battles at home, he still must fight military ones, where the outcome is more deadly. To win here, he must find a soldier who can command and win. 2 blocks from the White House sits the stately Willard Hotel. Late on a raw, windy day, the desk clerk at the hotel is approached by an officer seeking a room for him and his 13-year-old son. The clerk wrote of his first impression of the officer in his diary.
He was a short, round-shouldered man in a very tarnished general's uniform. He walked with no gait, no station, and no manner. His jacket was ill-fitting, and his hat crown sat level on his head. His rough, light brown whiskers, blue eyes, and scrubby appearance were that of an officer on half pay. He looked like a man who did, or once did, take too much to drink.
The clerk told the shabby officer he only had a small top-floor room left, and the threadbare commander said that would be fine. He was given the register to sign. When the clerk looked at the signature, he was shocked to see the name U.S. Grant and Son, Galena, Illinois. Grant, the hero of Donelson, conqueror of Vicksburg, deliverer of Chattanooga, had come to Washington from his headquarters in Nashville, Tennessee, in response to a summons from President Lincoln. The president, after 3 frustrating years of war, was seeking a general who would take the responsibility and act to place in command of the federal armies. Grant was that man.
What Grant brings to the war is something that has never really happened on the northern side before. He brings this sense of knowledge that we have the power, we have the strength, we have the guns, we have the men, and we can win. Up until now, everyone has been very good at fighting the war. I mean, it's not been any problem with whether it was Hooker or Burnside or McClellan. There was always the ability to fight the war. What Grant brings is a sense of, why don't we instead win this war? And Lincoln sees that in Grant, sees that part of his personality, and that really is a very different ingredient. And it seems sort of silly to say that everyone who's fighting a war wants to win it, but up until now, no one seems to know how. And Grant very definitely brings that new ingredient into the picture.
The next day at a White House ceremony, Lincoln thanked him for his past deeds and bestowed on him the rank of Lieutenant General, a rank held only by George Washington. When asked where he would make his headquarters, he informed the president that he will be with the Army of the Potomac. A man of his word, he leaves the White House reception and heads to the Army of the Potomac winter headquarters at Brandy Station, Virginia.
Grant makes a decision. He is not going to run the armies from Washington. He is going into the field. He will exercise field command of all the armies while traveling with the Army of the Potomac. Why does he travel with the Army of the Potomac? The Army of Northern Virginia is deemed to be the most important Confederate army, the very bulwark of the Confederacy. So Grant wants to inaugurate his campaign. He wants to focus the energies on the Union to destroying the 2 major Confederate armies.
As General Grant heads south to join General George Meade and the Eastern Army, another general with a great federal force in the West plans his move into the heart of the Southern Confederacy. Grant's decision to take personal direction of the federal effort in Virginia necessitated selection of another officer to assume his old position in the West. Normally, this position would go to the senior officer serving in that command. In this case, that would have been Major General George H. Thomas, commander of the Army of the Cumberland, one of 3 field armies operating in the military division of the Mississippi. Thomas was one of the very few generals on either side never to suffer a defeat on a battlefield where he was in command. He was a very capable general, but was passed over for command of the military division. William Tecumseh Sherman, commander of the Army of Tennessee, was placed in charge of the military division of the Mississippi to replace Grant. To his soldiers, he was Uncle Billy, and one of those soldiers described his appearance in a letter home.
General Sherman is the most American-looking man I ever saw, tall and lank. not very erect, with his hair like thatch, which he rubs up with his hands. A rusty beard trimmed close, a wrinkled face, sharp, prominent red nose, small, bright eyes, coarse red hands, felt hat slouched over the eyes, dirty dickie with the points wilted down, brown officer's coat with high collar and no shoulder straps, muddy trousers and one spur. He carries his hands in his pockets and is very aware in his gait and motions, talks continually and rapidly.
On the basis of his record, Sherman did not merit such a promotion, certainly not over Thomas. He and his brigade had been caught up in the rout of Union troops at 1st Manassas in 1862. Later that year, when he commanded in Kentucky, Sherman had suffered a nervous breakdown. He had been caught by surprise at Shiloh and suffered a stinging defeat at Chickasaw Bluffs. He did have one thing going for him. Over the preceding 2 years, Sherman and Grant became very close friends. The two men learned to trust each other absolutely. They worked well together. That was enough for Grant. Under his command is George H. Thomas's Army of the Cumberland, James B. McPherson's Army of the Tennessee, and John Schofield's Army of the Ohio. A total of about 100,000 veteran fighting men who, unlike their Eastern brothers, have known almost nothing but victory. Sherman's well-fed and equipped force faced a Confederate force of 65,000 men, whose biggest problems were getting blankets, shoes, and small arms. A letter from Private Edmund Jones to his wife Susan tells of the condition of the Confederate Army.
My dear wife, we have a great deal of sickness here in camp, mostly chills and fever. You write that you are knitting me a comforter, which I was very glad to hear, for I need something of that sort very much. Supplies are poor, so we do have to buy a little pork here occasionally and pay 75 cents to $1 a pound. We buy potatoes and pay $3 per bushel. I hear of no prospect of this cruel war coming to a close soon. In fact, I have come to the conclusion that it will not end before next March, when old Abe's term of office expires. Give my love to all inquiring friends and accept a large portion yourself. Kiss the children for me. E. H. Jones, March 24th, 1864.
Just before the new year, General Joseph E. Johnston was selected to assume command of the Confederate Army of Tennessee. When Braxton Bragg resigned following the disastrous defeat of his forces at Chattanooga and the near mutiny of his staff. In 1864, the Confederacy had no military counterpart to Grant. President Jefferson Davis, as Commander-in-Chief, undertook all rebel strategy. Soon after sending Johnston to Dalton, Davis wanted the new commander to assume the offensive operations into Tennessee. The president suffered from wishful thinking. Johnston understood that the enemy had the resources to mount an offensive on several different fronts. He knew he was heavily outnumbered and undersupplied. General Johnston countered with a strategy of his own. This was typical of the relationship between the general and the government. Neither paid attention to the other's point of view. This was the beginning of a 4-month on-again, off-again comedy that would have tragic results for the rebel cause. Grant did not have this problem. He knew he was in command.
Get beyond this road. That's when we have to start to.
Before the spring campaign could open, the Union commander drafted a master plan in the hope of coordinating the action of all the armies of the Union. He wanted to work all parts of the army together. For General George Meade and the Army of the Potomac, he planned to grab hold of the Army of Northern Virginia and choke the life out of it.
He tells Meade, where Lee goes, you will go. He'll give Meade broad strategic guidelines, but he will not interfere in the day-to-day operations of the Army. But we're going to find out this is going to change rather rapidly.
For Sherman, he proposed the elimination of General Joe Johnston's army and the taking of Atlanta 100 miles away. Sherman had been eager to get at Johnston, whose headquarters was at Dalton, Georgia, since assuming command. Grant's orders to Sherman were simple.
You, I propose to move against Johnston's army, to break it up, and to get to the interior of the enemy's country as far as you can, inflicting all the damage you can against their resources.
Grant wants to inaugurate his campaign. He wants to focus the energies on the Union to destroying the two major Confederate armies. With the armies in Virginia, he will look to the destruction of Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. His alter ego, General Sherman, out in Chattanooga, will look to the destruction of the Confederate Army of Tennessee. They're going to force the Confederates to fight for vital areas. Lee will be called upon to defend Richmond, and Grant will make Lee his objective.
By way of help in carrying out this plan, he would have an advantage not available to his predecessor nor to his cohorts in the East: a rapid transit system, all-weather supply line in the form of a railroad running all the way from Nashville to Atlanta. All during the winter, preparations continued for the campaign coming in the spring. Uncle Billy ordered his soldiers trained not only in military tactics, but rail work as well, since he realized the Western and Atlantic would be his lifeline, and any rebel damage would have to be quickly repaired. His men became so good at railroad repair that the Confederate soldiers, trying to stem the flow of Union supplies, swore that the Union Army carried with them spare bridges and tunnels. Sherman knew that victory in the coming fight would come to the commander that could resupply his troops. To get those supplies, Sherman would need every tunnel he could muster, and a plan to cut the enemy off from his base of supply. Sherman knew that if he was to have any chance of fighting his way through the North Georgia mountains and make his way to Atlanta, he had to keep his army moving and fed. In April, he told his quartermaster,
I'm going to move on Joe Johnston the day Grant telegraphs me he is going to hit Bobby Lee. If you don't have my army supplied and keep it supplied, we'll eat your mules up, sir. Eat your mules up.
To get at the rebel army, Sherman adopted a suggestion put forth several weeks earlier by General George Thomas. During the late February fighting in the Dalton area, the 39th Indiana Mounted Infantry of the 14th Corps had surprised the rebels at Dug Gap, seized the pass, and held it for several hours. Although in itself unimportant, this engagement drew Thomas's attention to that part of the Rocky Face Ridge south of Mill Creek Gap. Soon, some of his scouts discovered Snake Creek Gap and brought word that Johnston had done nothing to obstruct or fortify it. That discovery led Thomas to propose that his great Army of the Cumberland swing through Snake Creek Gap and seize Johnston's railroad in the Resaca area, just east of the southern end of the gap. Sherman accepted Thomas's plan with two major changes. The commanding general decided to use the large Army of the Cumberland as a stable base around which to maneuver the smaller, more nimble armies of McPherson and Schofield. The Army of the Tennessee would lead the advance through Snake Creek Gap. Once east of the Rocky Face, McPherson would simply cut the railroad and then fall back west. When Johnston abandoned Dalton and retreated, as Sherman believed he would, McPherson would roll up his flank. Meanwhile, Thomas and Schofield would assault Johnston from the north and pursue the retreating or trap the rebel army. Sherman had no illusions about the battle that lay ahead. He knew his foe would not quit, and wrote so to his wife.
No amount of poverty or adversity seems to shake their faith. Their niggers are gone, wealth and luxury gone, money worthless, starvation in view, and yet I see no sign of let up. some few deserters, plenty tired of war, but the masses determined to fight on. What they need is a more violent persuasion. All that has gone before is mere skirmishing. Your husband.
The three grand armies began to move on May 5th. And by the next day, Schofield's army had deployed in front of Johnston's Crow Valley fortifications. At the same time, 14th Corps marched out of its winter camp and headed for Ringgold, 12 miles northwest of Dalton. And 20th Corps left the valley near Lookout Mountain and then into the valley west of Rocky Face. All moves were completed by the night of the 7th. As the Union advance developed, Johnston posted the Army of Tennessee to meet the threat. He entrusted what he believed to be the most important sector of his Dalton line, the right, to the morose, one-legged General John Bell Hood. Johnston even detached 2 divisions from General Hardee's corps to bolster Hood's line. The great weakness in the rebel situation was the lack of sound information about the placement of the Federal troops. While the fighting flared at Tunnel Hill around the Rocky Face Ridge, Johnston received little solid information from the southwest. To a large degree, this dearth of information was due to General Fighting Joe Wheeler's poor deployment and his misuse of the Confederate cavalry. Wheeler was far more interested in massing his troopers for a massive mounted battle than using them for routine scouting and patrol. As the situation developed in northern Georgia, President Davis ordered General Leonidas Polk to join Johnston in person and to take him all the troops who could be spared from the defense of Alabama and Mississippi. On Sunday, May 8th, as Polk's troops headed for Rome, Georgia, the Union attacked on the northern end of Rocky Face Ridge and at Dug Gap. The fighting was fierce. As the Union forces moved ahead, they were harassed by small bodies of gray horsemen, slowing their march. Schofield could stand it no longer and ordered a brigade of cavalry to brush those gadflies from his path. It was a mistake. Wheeler's troopers, fading back, drew the Blue Riders out of contact with the main body, then turned, and with a sudden whoop and unexpected slash, killed or captured some 150 Bluecoats, including the colonel in command. The rest were driven headlong from the field. At Dug Gap, the Yankee troops of Howard's 4th Corps pushed their way up onto the ridge and fought their way along the Confederate line at the crest. But they could go no farther. Meanwhile, a division of the 20th Corps stormed up out of the valley west of Rocky Face Ridge and made a heavy assault on Dug Gap, which was defended by 2 regiments of Arkansas Mounted Rifles and 1 of Kentucky Cavalry. 4 Union regiments, the 33rd New Jersey, 73rd Pennsylvania, and 134th and 154th New York, made it to the rebel line, but were driven back. The Southerns weathered a storm of shot and shell until reinforcements arrived to secure the gap. Sherman lost about 400 men in those assaults, inflicted very few casualties on the Confederate forces, and gained no ground of any importance. The attacks did serve their purpose. They kept Johnston's attention fixed on the Dalton area. For 3 days, nothing was heard from McPherson. Sherman's main concerns and hopes lay with his protege. Late on the evening of May 9th, leading units of McPherson's column reached Snake Creek Gap and found it unoccupied, unguarded, unobstructed, and unobserved. McPherson had completed one of the great strategic marches of the war. But McPherson paused. There were only 4,000 Confederates between him and success. That was 4,000 more than the Union commander expected. He felt out the defenses, found the Stout, and decided that, unsupported as he was, deep in the enemy rear, his wisest course was to withdraw to Snake Creek Gap. When Johnston learned of Bluecoats in his rear, he knew he could no longer stay passive in Dalton. In a daring forced march, he managed to send Hood with 3 divisions to the railhead west of Resaca before McPherson regained his courage and cut him off. When Johnston received word that McPherson was still immured in Snake Creek Gap, he ordered Hood to return, leaving 2 divisions at Tilton, a station on the rail line from which they could meet a threat in any direction. Sherman's great plan to cut Johnston's supply line had come very close to success, but failed. Then and later, Sherman typically and ungraciously sought to blame the failure on others. But in truth, it was Sherman's fault for not strengthening McPherson or using Thomas's stronger force. For the Southerners, it could have been much worse. Johnston was completely fooled. Only the weakness of McPherson's force saved the rebels from a calamitous defeat at the opening of the campaign. One of the big advantages the Army of Northern Virginia always had over its blue-clad opponents was Robert E. Lee's ability to read an opponent's mind. This was based on careful analysis of information from scouts, friendly civilians, and enemy newspapers. Since March, Lee had been studying Grant, and up on Clark Mountain, he came up with what he thought was in Grant's mind. Grant would cross the Rapidan by Ely's Ford or Germanna Ford. He would then look for open ground beyond the dense forest known as the Wilderness to bring his superior numbers to bear. A year ago, the Federal Army took a horrible beating at the hands of the Army of Northern Virginia at Chancellorsville, suffering 17,000 casualties. The average Billy Yank had hoped they would never see this place again. When General Ulysses Grant broke winter camp on the evening of May 3rd and marched the army across the Rapidan River toward the Wilderness, just as Lee predicted, the memory of that horrible defeat haunted many of the veterans in the Union ranks. There were many signs of that fighting. Skeletons in rotten blue, washed partly out of their shallow graves by the winter rains. Burnt stumps set ablaze by the shells. No one but the devil himself would choose such ground for a field of battle, veterans said. The devil and Old Man Lee.
Grant goes into the Wilderness because he looks at a way to grapple with the Confederates early in the campaign. There are 2 alternatives. He can use the railroad as his line of supply, the Orange and Alexandria Railroad from Culpeper to Gordonsville. That will pass to the west of the Wilderness, but that will make him dependent on the railroad for supplies. And after all, Mosby is a major problem, and he can foresee tying up 20,000 men guarding railroads. Where if he goes rapidly through the Wilderness, passing the Wilderness in one long day's march, reaching the open country near Spotsylvania Courthouse, then he can grapple with Lee in the open, where his 116,000 men and more than 400 cannon will guarantee victory. Also, he will supply his army by tidewater. The tidewater can't be bothered by Mosby. Vessels coming up the Rappahannock, the Pamunkey, other streams can supply his army as he moves toward Richmond.
Grant expected to clear the area in 2 days, long before Lee could mass his troops in opposition. Throughout the first day's march, the Federal Army met no obstacles. The Confederates did not try to hinder their progress. Grant established his headquarters beside the road near a deserted farmhouse where he and his staff could observe his soldiers on the march. As he sat smoking and swapping remarks with his associates, a newspaper correspondent approached and asked the question not even Lincoln had asked. How long was it going to take to reach Richmond? Grant answered the reporter's presumptive question.
I will agree to be there in about 4 days. That is, if General Lee becomes a party to the agreement. But if he objects, the trip will undoubtedly be prolonged.
So far, General Lee seemed to be a party to the plan. By nightfall, the Army of the Potomac controlled the main routes in and around the wilderness.
Close it up, boys. Keep it tight.
But in point of fact, Lee was moving with everything he had. The Army of Northern Virginia stole to within 1 mile of the Federal front line. There, they waited for daybreak. General Richard Ewell's 2nd Corps on the Orange Turnpike. General A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps on the parallel Orange Plank Road.
Grant has problems. Grant has to worry about more than 7,000 wagons, a huge wagon train. Think of 7,047 passenger buses on a primitive road network. Put them all on one road, and they would reach from Richmond to Washington. So Grant plans to pass the wilderness in 1 long day's march. But the wagons move too slowly. Hancock has reached Chancellorsville by 10:30 in the morning after crossing the Rapidan and has to halt his march. Also, Warren slows his march down. Lee, of course, realizes the wilderness will work to his advantage to nullify Grant's superior numbers and equipment. So Lee looks to a battle in the wilderness.
On May 5th, the rattle of musket shot broke the dawn silence. The New York 5th Cavalry met the 47th North Carolina Infantry ahead of Hill's 3rd Corps on the Plank Road.
Get in here! Get in here! Big company to the left!
Sporadically and without full commitment, the two armies clashed. Neither wanted to fully engage the other on a battlefield where the line of sight was measured in feet. On the left, 2 of Confederate Major General Edward Johnson's 3 brigades reacted by clawing their way through the brush toward the sound of the firing. The Federal troops were overlapped on both flanks. Savagely assailed from dead ahead, the Union line broke. As one veteran said,
It was a battle of invisibles with invisibles. As for fighting, it was simply bushwhacking on a grand scale. In brush where all formation beyond that of a regiment or company was soon lost, and where such a thing as a consistent line of battle on either side was impossible.
Meade wanted to push on, or rather, Meade was feeling the need to push on with Grant looking over his shoulder.
The relationship between Grant and Meade is a difficult one by the fact that Grant is simply looking over Meade's shoulder. I mean, that's a terrible position for Meade to be in, to have your commanding general watching everything you do from behind you. Beyond that, there are corps commanders who are used to the way things have been done in the East, which is not always very good. A lot of the things that have been done in the East are clumsy, are unfortunate politically. They've lost a great deal of their prestige because they've lost a lot of the fights. And Grant comes west and really does not take that approach. You know, he's not looking to judge these commanders. He wants this to work. I mean, he wants this army to function as a team. And what he finds is there are flaws.
One of the few places to see the enemy in the wilderness is Saunders Field. At 1 o'clock on the afternoon of May 5th, Griffin sent his men across that open ground to meet their enemy in full force. Wave after wave, the Union Army ran against the Confederate line. One by one, men fell. The randomness of death shakes even the most seasoned veteran. The Federal Army met an unyielding wall of rebels at Saunders Field. Their valiant surges against the stalwart line brought only short-lived hope of a breakthrough. The Confederates stood their ground. The whole battlefield seemed to be boiling and smoking, with dense clouds going out to blot out the sunlight. From the rear, Warren pushed the rest of his corps into the fight. And there is no coherent story to be told about any of it. It was all violent confusion. with occasional revealing glimpses to be had in the infernal fog of war. During the fighting in Saunders Field, the dry grass and leaves caught fire, and soon flames were sweeping across the clearing. Efforts to retrieve the wounded and dying from the field were often futile, and the fire consumed the bodies of soldiers, dead and alive. One veteran remembered the horrible scene.
Swept by the flames, the trees, bushes, and logs now took fire, and dense clouds of smoke rolled across the clearing. The clearing now became a raging inferno, in which many of the wounded perished. The bodies of the dead were blackened and burned beyond all possibility of recognition. Tragic conclusion to this day of horror. Diary unknown, Private Ohio Infantry.
A New York regiment crossed the weedy little field, got into more fight than it could handle, and ran back to the other side of the field, never to be seen again in this battle, and leaving 70% of their numbers lying dead or wounded on the blood-soaked field. The day grew old, and the sun was going down, and the exhausted men of Griffin's division were about ready to fall clear out of the war. At last he got a couple of brigades lined up and sent them into the attack. When they hit hard. But if the Yankees had their best troops in the fight, so did the Confederates. There was a titanic last gasp in the fading light. It is possible that in all the war, the men of the North and South did no more desperate fighting than they did right there on Saunders Field. As the day faded, the last convulsions of death spread to a nearby dense tangle of undergrowth. Once again, the horrible wilderness became a third party to the mayhem and turmoil of modern battle. There, part of Major General John Sedgwick's 6th Corps skirmished with the 1st North Carolina Cavalry. The tenuous federal hold on the critical southern roads collapsed. Only night brought a welcome relief to the battle. In the darkness, the men on both sides began the search for fallen friends.
At night, we slept with our guns in our hand, where we stopped to lay down to try to sleep and meditate over the transaction of the day. We could not sleep well, the country being so desolate and God-forsaken that we hoped we would not get killed in such God-forsaken country. And the whippoorwills made the woods ring with their song. It seemed so desolate that we wished we could get out of this spot of the country. None of us wished to die here. The thought of dying stared us in the face as bullets flew thick around here, but we pushed ahead until we could see something like an open spot ahead of us. Lorenzo D. Barnhart, Company B, 110th Ohio.
Meade is very cautious, is slow to move. He has men like Hancock who are the opposite, who are quick to move and are not cautious, and sometimes that creates a conflict. He has commanders like Burnside, and here's the lack of coordination. Burnside is not under Meade's command, he's under Grant's command, so Burnside technically outranks Meade. At the Battle of Fredericksburg, Meade had been Burnside's subordinate. So it's a sort of ridiculous game that's going on here, and added into that mix is the personalities of these individuals. A man like Gouverneur Warren, who is a nitpick artist, a man who's constantly seeing ways things should be done better. When he has no business offering an opinion, he offers lots of opinions, and so he makes enemies. You have a man like Sedgwick who doesn't say a lot. He's sort of the old soldier. He's a very efficient soldier, and he tries to stay out of all this, so he's sort of left behind when some of these decisions are made. Hancock, who's going to pretty much do what Hancock wants to do on the battlefield, whether Meade wants him to or not. All of these ingredients create turmoil. And in the Battle of the Wilderness, particularly where one hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing, when you've got chaos on the field because nobody can find each other, nobody can see each other, you don't really know where Lee is, they have no idea where Longstreet is, this creates a chaotic situation. And so it ends up where you have independent commands fighting their own battles.
From the sight of the shattered bodies of the soldiers from both sides who littered the battlefield, and the exhausted faces of the survivors, it was evident that neither blue nor gray had prevailed. Morning brought hope that the Federal Army would rally. As the last trace of night faded from the dawn sky, Major General Winfield S. Hancock's 2nd Corps caught Hill's line sleeping at their position on the Orange Plank Road.
Right, I want to get everybody in here. We're going to push them down the road.
The Federal Army moved swiftly and swept the languishing Confederate soldiers back nearly a mile. General Lee himself witnessed the melee, the confusion as his men turned heel and ran. The humiliation of Hill's incompetence was more than he could stand. With reckless disregard for his own safety, he rode after them, shouting for them to line up in formation. Many did, but Hancock's men had not relaxed their pace. Lee knew his line could not hold much longer. As the general rode to the right to confer with Hill, the steady stream of retreating Confederates grew to a flood. The Confederate right flank had collapsed. The Federals drove relentlessly against the gray lines, pushing the rebels back even farther to Widow Tap Farm. At that critical moment, as Lee watched the Union Army advancing across the Widow Tap's field, he looked behind him to see the vanguard of General James Longstreet's 1st Army Corps arriving from Gordonsville with much-needed reinforcements. The first troops to reach the battle were the Texans under Brigadier General John Gregg. Lee immediately ordered the Texas Brigade to advance to meet the Federals. One of the Texans recalled Lee's words.
Who are you, my boys?
"Texas boys," they cried.
Hooray for Texas! Hooray for Texas! Texas has never failed me.
General Gregg gave the order to move with words that were sure to stiffen the resolve of his veterans.
Attention, Texas Brigade. The eyes of General Lee are upon you. Forward, march!
As Gregg's Confederates moved forward into the line of battle, they saw something no one had ever seen before. Lee placed himself in position to lead them. The rebels hesitated as Lee urged them forward. Leonard Gee, staff courier to Gregg, summed up the feelings of the men and possibly the entire Army of Northern Virginia when he said,
"I would charge hell itself for that old man."
They would make the charge, and they would do it without General Lee. "Go back, General Lee, go back," was shouted by some. Others ordered, "Lee to the rear." They told him they would make this attack only if he went back. Finally, Gregg motioned to Lee that Longstreet was on the field, and Lee relented. He went to the rear to confer with Old Pete and left the Texans to their deadly duty. Quickly, the Texas Brigade assumed the lead, and with a blood-curdling rebel yell, picked up the charge and regained the lost ground nearly to Brock Road. Once again, Longstreet had saved the Army of Northern Virginia from certain defeat, but the cost was appalling.
Dear sister, I would have written you sooner but not had the opportunity of doing so for the fact we have been fighting constantly for the last 2 days. I am very sorry to say that Company D suffered very much. We have been counting the losses of our company since the fight, killed, wounded, and missing. Lieutenant Edmondson, Baker, Williams, Fields, Charles, and Miles are the killed. Jones, Hill, Andy, and Frank, Schwartz, and John Sunday wounded, some very slight, and Jones I don't suppose will get well. I feel very thankful that I've come off safe so far. I would write more, but not have the time to do so. This is all the paper I have. My love to you all, as ever your brother. A.H. Byers, 1st Virginia Cavalry.
For 2 days, 14,000 Confederates have met 25,000 Federal troops in the wilderness. It would be easy to think that numerical odds alone would make the difference between victory and defeat for the National Army. But to do so is to misapprehend the terror of the wilderness. There can be no order in this horrible place. Out in the open, a commander can rally his troops, can organize his men into battle formations. In the wilderness, chaos prevails. It is each man for himself. Each man fights his own battle, according to his own plan. Most times that means firing blindly at anything that moves, a noise, unseen through the brush and smoky haze, the least hint of movement. A man who waits to see what he is shooting at could be waiting for death. Throughout the day, General Longstreet, always grand in battle, led his men forward. Momentum was on their side, until something happened in the dense tangle of undergrowth that brought all of it crashing down around him. Suddenly, Longstreet was struck, hit in the neck and shoulder by fire from his own side.
Easy, easy, General. General, feel. Okay. General, feel. This is my core.
In the past year, the wilderness has claimed two of Lee's most reliable generals. Men Lee counted on to be there when he needed them, to fight a good fight. Now, Stonewall Jackson is lost forever. James Longstreet is wounded, gone indefinitely.
We're going to be able to save that arm. I know.
Late in the afternoon, General Lee tried to rally the troops for one last assault. Darkness and Union reserves thwarted his effort. The Battle of the Wilderness had ended in a bloody draw.
The Battle of Wilderness is essentially a draw. Some would call it a defeat for Grant. It's really hard to measure who won the battle, but that really isn't the point, because what happens after the Wilderness is something that has never happened before for the Army of the Potomac. Before, every time they would fight a battle, they would turn around and march back to Washington or cross the Potomac River and get out of Virginia. The soldiers, even the poor guy who can't read and can't read a compass, understands that something very different has happened when Grant orders them up on the road to march. They're not marching back to escape Lee, they're marching south. They're marching deeper into Virginia. That is a profound difference and a profound change. And even the soldier who really had no idea who Ulysses Grant was suddenly realizes, wait a minute, there is something very different from the top now.
That fight would mean that the blue tide would continue to rise.
Oh, I'm a good old rebel, now that's just what I am. For this fair land of freedom, I do not care a damn. I'm glad I fit against it, I only wish we'd won. And I don't want no pardon for anything I've done. I hates the Constitution, this great republic too. I hates the Freedmen's Bureau in uniforms of blue. I hates the nasty eagle with all his brags and fuss. The lying, thieving Yankees, I hate some worse than this. I hates the Yankee nation and everything they do. I hates the Declaration of Independence too. I hates the glorious Union, 'tis dripping with our blood. I hates their striped banner, I fit it all I could. Followed on last Robert for 4 years near about. Got wounded in 3 places and starved at Pine Lookout. I caught the rheumatism at camping in the snow. But I killed a chains of Yankees, I'd like to kill some more. $300,000 Yankees are stiff in southern dust. We got 300,000 before they conquered us. They died of southern fever, southern steel and shot. I wish there was 3 million instead of what